Welcome back to all of my amazing subscribers. So good to see you guys again. Today, we are going to practice our English listening skills in a really fun way with a story, and not just any story. Today, I'm going to tell you guys the story of how the world almost ended. Sit back, relax, and listen as I read this story to you. But pay attention, because at the end of the story, I will ask you 3 questions to check and see how well you paid attention. Plus, make sure you keep watching till the end of the video, because I'm going to be teaching some of the more difficult language used in this story. If you are ready to get started with the story of how the world almost came to an end, click like on this video. Make sure you are subscribed, and let's jump in. The year was 1962, and the world was on the edge of a major disaster. Tensions, friction, problems between the United States on one side and the Soviet Union on the other side were through the roof. In other words, things were extremely tense and scary. Both sides, the United States and the Soviet Union, had access to nuclear weapons, extremely powerful weapons, and one wrong move, one misstep, could easily destroy the lives of millions of people. This was the atmosphere of that year, 1962. Now, deep in the waters of the Caribbean Ocean, a Soviet submarine was hiding. Inside that submarine was a Soviet naval officer, a very important man in the Soviet Navy named Vasily Arkhipov, and he was about to make a decision that would change the history of the world. This Soviet submarine was hiding somewhere near Cuba, but U.S. Navy ships had found it. The U.S. Navy ships were dropping something called depth charges into the water. These were underwater bombs, and they were designed to scare the Soviets into surfacing or coming up to the surface. But the crew inside this Soviet submarine had lost all contact with their home base back in Moscow, Russia, so they didn't know what was going on in the water above. They had no clue what was going on, no information, no idea why they were hearing explosions in the watery space above them. They had been hiding underwater for so long that they thought maybe the war had already started. The captain of this Soviet submarine was terrified and angry as well. He believed his submarine, his ship, his crew were under attack from the United States, and he wanted to fight back using nuclear weapons. That's right, this Soviet submarine was equipped with a nuclear torpedo, an extremely powerful bomb that had the potential to start World War III. But in order to use this weapon, in order to launch the nuclear torpedo, all 3 senior naval officers on the ship had to agree to do so. Without the agreement of all 3 men, the nuclear torpedo could not be used. Now, 2 of these 3 men were ready to push the button needed to launch the torpedo. 2 of the 3 senior naval officers were ready to begin the war. From their perspective, this was the only logical decision. It was the only way to survive. The captain was shouting orders, yelling at his crew. Everyone was freaking out on this underwater submarine. People were panicking. The submarine was running out of air. Temperatures inside the ship were rising. It was time to make a decision. Then came the critical moment. The moment of truth, the moment when all eyes on the ship turned to the third senior naval officer, a man named Vasily Arkhipov. His decision was going to decide the fate of the world. Like the other two senior naval officers, would he agree to launch the nuclear torpedo on the ship, starting a war with the United States? Or would he do something different? Arkhipov knew that time to make this decision was running out, but he was still remaining calm and thinking about the situation as hard as he could. Like the other crew members, he had heard the sounds of explosions up above the submarine, but unlike the rest of the crew and the other two senior naval officers, he wasn't convinced that the United States was attacking them directly. Was it possible, he thought, that the United States Navy was simply giving them a warning shot or trying to scare them? Arkhipov told the captain of the ship that it was important they go to the surface to get new information and new orders, new instructions from their home base back in Moscow, not make this rash decision to fire the nuclear torpedo. Of course, this was a huge risk, but Arkhipov held his ground. In other words, he stuck to his decision. And in the end, he convinced the others to follow his plan. Slowly, the Soviet submarine rose to the surface, and everyone realized that he had been correct. Arkhipov's calm demeanor and cool head in a tricky situation had prevented World War III from breaking out. The world never knew just how close it came to disaster that day. It was only years and years later that people started to learn about this story, the story of Vasily Arkhipov, the man who saved the world. All right, guys, that was the story of Vasily Arkhipov. I hope I'm saying that Russian name correctly. The story of how one brave man made a decision that saved millions of lives, if not the entire world, right? So now it's time to take a look at 3 listening comprehension questions. Yeah, we're going to check and see how well did you understand this story. If you can answer these questions, that tells me you understood the story well. My first question for you guys is, what were the 2 countries at conflict named in the story? Yeah, if you remember, there were 2 countries involved in the story. What were they? My second question for you is, how many senior officers needed to agree to launch the nuclear torpedo? Yeah, there were some senior officers on that Soviet submarine, and you needed all of them to agree in order to fire the torpedo, right? So how many of them were there? My last question will check and see if you really understood the main idea of this story, okay? So how, specifically, did Vasily Arkhipov save the world? Can you tell me specifically, what did he do to save the world? Once again, see if you can answer these questions and then go and check your answers. I'm going to post the answers to these questions down in the comment section. But guys, don't go away yet, because now it's time to take a look at some of the more difficult language used in the story. Let's do a vocab breakdown. The first phrase or expression I want to talk about is on the edge. It means very close to something happening, often something bad, right? So some synonyms might be close to the edge. We could also say on the brink of disaster. Brink is very similar to edge. You know, if this is a table, for example, if we have a table here, 4 legs on the table, this would be the edge of the table. Yeah, maybe you set a glass of water down on the table. The edge of the table would not be a very safe place to set down the glass of water, right? We could also say on the precipice. You are on the precipice of something. A precipice is like a big rocky cliff. If you were to fall off of this precipice, that would be a very scary thing, right? So precipice, brink, edge, they all are similar words. We have two example sentences here. The first one is taken from the story we heard today. The world was on the edge of nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? So, in other words, the world was very close to nuclear war, right? It was close to the edge of nuclear war. It was on the brink of disaster. The world was on the brink of disaster. It seemed like the world was balancing on some precipice, looking down into a really bad situation. Okay, let's take a look at example sentence 2 here. The company was on the edge of bankruptcy. They were on the edge of admitting that they had no money, right, before the new investor came in. Okay, so you've got a company. This company is in a bad situation. They are on the edge of something. On the edge of what? On the edge of bankruptcy. They were very close to bankruptcy. They were on the brink of disaster before the new investor came in. So someone new comes in, they bring some new money, some new funding, and maybe the company is now back on track. Another terrific phrase we saw used in the story is hold your ground. What does that mean? It means to stick to your decision or opinion even when others disagree with you or pressure you into agreeing with them, right? So some synonyms to hold your ground might be, we could say stand firm. Yes, stand firm in your decision. Yeah, don't waver. Don't waver. Don't shake in your decision. Stand firm. We could also say stay strong or stand strong. We could say not back down. He didn't back down in his decision. We could also say he was steadfast in his decision. All of these tell me basically the same thing. They tell me that someone has made up their mind and they're not going to change it, no matter what. In the story, we saw Vasily Arkhipov held his ground and he refused to launch the torpedo. Yeah, he really stood firm. He really didn't back down. He really stayed strong. He really stayed steadfast in his decision to not fire the nuclear torpedo. A second example sentence here, she held her ground during the meeting, even though everyone else disagreed. Oh, this one's interesting, right? We have a meeting taking place, maybe in an office space, some kind of work environment. We have a woman who is participating in this meeting, and it looks like she is the black sheep. She's the odd one out. She's the one that has a different opinion. Her opinion is different from everyone else's, right? But even though she thinks differently, she held her ground. She did not back down. She stood firm. She stayed strong. She held steadfast in her beliefs, in her opinions. I want to ask you guys a question. Do you have an opinion that is maybe an unpopular opinion? In other words, most people would probably disagree with you, but you will always hold your ground. You can let me know down in the comments section. Another wonderful, really spoken English phrase or expression that we saw used in this story was freaking out. Freaking out. If someone is freaking out, then they are very scared or very anxious, right? Some other ways to say that could be panicking, losing control. Yeah, if you are freaking out, you are losing your mind. And here's another way to say it, but keep in mind that it is vulgar. It is a swear word. We can also say losing your shit, right? If you're freaking out, if you're losing your shit, if you're panicking, losing control, losing your mind. These all mean basically the same thing. They mean that you are scared and anxious, you are in a high pressure situation, and you don't know what to do. The submarine crew was freaking out because they thought war had started. Yeah, remember in the story, they heard those warning shots, those explosions up above the submarine that were designed to scare them, and they thought those were meant to hit them directly. They thought they were being shot at. They thought the war had already begun, so what did they do? They freaked out. They lost their shit. They lost their mind. They panicked. They really lost control. They were super scared, super anxious in this high pressure situation. We could also say this high stakes situation. Look at number 2 here. I was freaking out before my big presentation, but everything went well. Yeah, this one is familiar to me. Back when I was in college, I would really hate giving a presentation to the class, especially a big or important presentation. I would probably be freaking out too. I'd be panicking. I would be losing my mind. I'd be losing my shit getting ready to put on this presentation. What about you guys? If you had to do a big public speaking event and, let's say, give a presentation or give a talk in front of hundreds of people, would you be calm and collected, or would you lose your shit? Would you freak out? You can let me know down in the comments. Before we go today, I'd like to give a huge, giant, tremendous thank you to my channel members. You guys make my work possible. Without you, there would be no English is Easy with Connor. These guys contribute $5 a month to support me as their YouTube English teacher. So if you want to be a channel member, if you want PDFs for all of my lessons, bonus videos that are not available to the public, then you should become a member. You can do so by clicking join right here on YouTube or by going to patreon.com/EnglishWithConnor. They both do the same thing. And if you liked today's lesson, if you enjoy learning English through a crazy story, go click on this video and I'll tell you a true story about me from my life about the time I almost died in China. Go check it out.